Hello and welcome back to Down to the Tyre. Today I'm joined by a guest for the first time in a while. I'm lucky enough to call this person a good friend of mine. She yaps about motorsport as much as I do, particularly F2, which is going to be a big focus of this episode. She also has podcast experience as part of her own podcast, Chaos in the Paddock. I'm joined by Fleur. Hello, Fleur. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I feel like it's been a long time in the making. We've been discussing it for a while.
It has, because I took a bit of a summer break myself. Not planned, but had a lot going on, various holidays. I moved, hence why my background is different. I'm now in a new location. So, yeah, I took a little bit of a summer break myself, but back for the kind of winter half of the season
Yeah.
now, which we are fully into the swing of, especially in terms of F2, which, as I said, we're going to get onto. But first, do you want to just kind of tell the listeners who you are, what you do, just to intro if anyone's not familiar with you, and then plug anything that you want to plug as well now, and then we'll do it at the end as well to give two opportunities.
Perfect. Shameless self-promo
Yeah.
about to occur. So I'm Fleur. I am a creative writing and journalism student at university, but I'm also a motorsport TikToker, which is something I've come to get used to sharing with people. My TikTok handle is checkered flag with Fleur. That's the same on my Instagram, and my Twitter is just checkered flag, like WF. And I'm also I've only just started considering myself a motorsport journalist. I sometimes am hesitant to call myself that because I'm very new to it. But you know what? I'll call myself it. I'm a motorsport journalist in the early stages, but that's what I do in my free time. I volunteer for Formula Nerds, so I'm a writer there. And I've previously worked for publications like Everything F1, where I've done press conferences and basically attended events and stuff like that.
Yeah, because you've attended some really cool events, and I have to mention because you attended stuff at Donington, and any excuse I have to talk about Donington, anyone who's listened to this podcast will know I will talk about Donington. So yeah, tell us more about some of those events you've attended, whether it's been for press or just like any races you've been to as well.
Yeah, so Donington was actually the first thing I ever did as kind of the journalism side, and that was actually through like a family friend. Like my auntie knew I was interested in doing motorsport journalism. This was literally at like the beginning of me doing stuff. I think I just started my TikTok. I had something like 500 followers or something like that. And I just started doing my TikTok, and my auntie had worked with a woman, Sarah Hall, and she's a driver in a championship called the Focus Cup. And she like reached out to me and was like, "Oh, would you like to come along to a race weekend?" And I was staying up in Loughborough at the time, so I was like, "Oh my God, I'd love to." So I went to the Focus Cup race weekend for that, and basically got to like stand in the pit lanes, and it was the F4 testing day at the same time. So that was really fun because I got to see a bunch of the drivers who I know like of, and it was like, "Oh my God, you guys are there!" And I was stood in the pit lane as they were all going out because I just kind of like snuck in and stayed there. Um, so that was very fun. F1 wise, I've done Silverstone last year, which I'm kind of like sad I did last year and not this year. Did it during Max dominance instead of Lewis Hamilton win. But you know what? It was an incredible, that was my first ever like race experience. So it was incredible. And then this year I did the Belgian Grand Prix, which was very cool. I did that with my friend, literally in the depths of the grandstands. Like we trekked through like what felt like miles of Belgian forest to get to our seats each day. And then I also did the Monaco Grand Prix, which if you do follow me on TikTok, people will know this because there is a video of me crying over Charles Leclerc winning because I'm a Ferrari fan and a Charles Leclerc fan. So that was incredible just because I saw Charles Leclerc win his first ever like time at Monaco, like the fact that he actually won while I was there was pretty wild, and I was 10 steps away from him. And then I saw him the next day and I like almost cried in person in front of him, which would have been really embarrassing. And then what else have I done this year? Um, and then I also attended the F1 London exhibition. That was with a company called Sportizzle. They reached out to me and were like, "Oh, would you like to go for us?" Because their person had dropped out. So I got up at 5 a.m. to head into London to go see it on the opening of the press day, which was really fun. I mean, Damon Hill was there, so I got to see Damon Hill and see the exhibition obviously before anyone else was there. And I also interviewed the curator and like the director. So it was very, very cool. And yeah, I think I've done some F2 press conferences, but all of those have been like on Zoom. I think all those are all the events I've actually been out to, you know?
Cool, amazing. Firstly, you stayed in Loughborough and we didn't meet. That's crazy because that's where I'm from. Not living there anymore. It's where I moved out of.
Oh my God.
But yeah, that's really cool. Such a good list of events. Everything I have attended has been at Donington. So, but how can I
I
not
love
when I'm
that.
so local to it? And I mentioned in the intro that you are part of a podcast as well. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, so my friend Kiara, who's also a motorsport journalist, started like a company website. I don't know what you'd like to call it, but it's basically a collective of motorsport like content creators, and we will have a podcast called Chaos in the Paddock, which I've been on. A few of my other content creator friends have been on. I am hoping to be on again soon in the future. And basically just covering recent news, also playing fun games. We like did our whole dream F1 grid and everyone kept all the current F1 drivers on. I replaced all of them with F2 drivers because I did not realize people were going to plan to keep the current grid the same. I did not get the memo, clearly. Yeah, and we also write articles. So one of my friends, Claire, she covers MotoGP and she's written her first ever like MotoGP article, which was very fun for her. So basically, it's just a space for like motorsport people to get into the industry and a place to shout about the things we're interested about.
That's really cool. And I want to ask as well, because you mentioned that you're also studying journalism. I know you've only just started it. It's literally your
Literally a
first
week
week.
in.
But as someone who did a journalism master's, I always love to speak to people who are studying it. Like, I think my first episode that I had with a guest was Lizzie Lemon, who also did a journalism master's. She's just finished it now, but that is one of my favorite episodes I've done because I love talking about people studying journalism. So yeah, kind of like, how's it going so far? What are you hoping to get out of it, and kind of how do you think, like, what's made you decide that's kind of the way you want to go down becoming a journalist in your career? Obviously you're already a journalist. Like, the thing is with journalism, I feel like everyone, like, if you do it you are one and you do it, so
Mm.
you are a journalist. But like, what made you choose that as a step in your journey?
For me, I think it was a good like idea for me to expand my academics because I took a year out, which is when I started getting into my like journalism and decided I wanted to do motorsport journalism. But I do love academics. I really love learning. I always have. I've always really enjoyed like school. And when I realized I wanted to do like motorsport journalism, I knew I wanted to do it in a more like academic setting while I was doing my like volunteering and my writing on the side, because not only does that give me like 3 years of uni to get all my experience that I possibly can before I then enter the world like with a degree plus the experience, but for me it also means that when I come out of uni I know the things I need to know like on a academic basis, and I will get experience. Like the reason I chose the uni I did is because they have people who've gone into work in motorsport and they have quite good connections that they mentioned like on open days and stuff. When I said I was interested in motorsport journalism, they were like, oh, we have people we can get you in touch with. And for me that was like a big thing because I think most people who are trying to get into the motorsport industry or are in the motorsport industry will know connections is the most important part. It's not about your experience, it's about who you know. Like obviously the experience you have hugely helps you when you know the right people, but you're not getting anywhere if you don't know where to look and who to talk to. So I think for me that was important. But yeah, I just think I'm also like I'm doing dual honors, so I'm doing creative writing and journalism because I wanted to improve my writing while also doing broadcast journalism and stuff like that. Because for me, that would be the ideal area that I then go into, like broadcast motorsport journalism. And I feel like uni is the best place to learn all the skills necessary to do that and have that help into that aspect of the industry because I've already got the in the writing side.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm always like, I think a lot of people think when they think, how do I get into motorsport? There's not many people online who talk about their own personal journeys. So when someone
Yeah.
has like that own story to tell, I'm always really keen to delve into it because someone who's listening to this might be considering going into motorsport journalism and they might, like, have not considered uni as an option, and hearing this might help them. So yeah, that's great. I feel like that leads us on nicely. That kind of closes off the section about you. And you mentioned wanting to replace all the F1 drivers with F2 drivers. So I feel like that leads us perfectly on to talk about F2. Now, F2 this year so far, obviously, unlike F3, we're still going with F2. We've not finished the season yet. F2 has been a bit crazy lately as well with some driver swaps. There's been quite a lot going on. So, kind of, how have you found F2 this year? What are your kind of, when you think of F2 this year, what stands out to you? Whether it's drivers or particular like race wins or moments or anything like that. What are your kind of overall thoughts on the season so far?
I think this year I've struggled with F2 a little bit, just from the perspective of because the new cars have come in, it's been weird because I don't feel like obviously all the drivers who are the best have been shown to be the best. So it's been really hard to place drivers. And I think, especially with someone, let's take Kimi and Ollie, for example, because obviously both of them have F1 seats for next year, they've both not been performing at the level people expect, especially Ollie, who's done a season in F2 and last year really impressed people. And it's really hard to like justify why he's getting an F1 seat looking at this year's F2 season. But I say this a lot about F2. It's not necessarily about where you finish in the standings, but the season you have as a whole and whether you have those standout moments, which is why Ollie's got an F1 seat, because last year in F2, he had these incredible standout moments like in Baku and things like that, even though he didn't win. But I also think this year is so competitive. I would argue this is like one of the most competitive years we've had in a long time. I mean, you have champions from previous series, you have drivers who've been in F2 for a while who've suddenly like doing really, really well. You have multiple drivers who are in talks for F1 seats this year, if not next year or in the next coming years. You have like insane talent in the series. So it's so hard to be like, oh, because Gabriel Bortoletto's leading right now, he's the best, ignoring all of those other drivers who have done incredibly this season. And especially some of them have had really, really bad luck. Pepe Marti, I'm talking to you. I feel so bad for him. I I said that I may have jinxed him because when I was doing F2 press conferences, it was an ongoing joke that any driver I liked would never finish in the top three when I was doing a press conference. And since I like did a round table and Pepe was there, he has had the worst luck. And I was like, did I jinx
First.
it? Was it my fault? Maybe, but I'm not going to admit that. So it was never my fault. I'm only good luck. But yeah, so I think F2 has been really like interesting in that sense this year, that it kind of has been all over the place. I'm trying to think of key moments. I think when Kimi won by like 8 seconds in Silverstone in the rain, that was insane. Also, his overtake at Spa, like up the hill, crazy behavior. That man is unhinged, and I appreciate it a lot. Gabriel Bortoleto as a whole deserves a shout out because if he wins the championship, he's crazy because he will have done F3 and F2 back to back. And if he doesn't then end up in that Audi seat, him or Franco, please, please, I need it. But equally, you've had like a sadder side of F2 this year where I feel like more so than previous years, even though it has been talked about in previous years, you have finances talked about a lot. I mean, obviously you have Zach O'Sullivan dropping out because of like finances. You have like Franco with his F1 seat talking a lot about how he struggled to move up the series because of financing. You have like a lot of situations like this. I mean, Paul Aaron has been quite vocal about the fact that he wanted to win this year because he didn't know if he could afford another season without the support of an F1 team. And I mean, the fact, especially with Zach O'Sullivan's case, the fact that he was a junior driver academy, it shows that not all of these academies support their drivers enough for them to just be in the series. Um, yeah, I think it's been an interesting season for a lot of different reasons, and it's a close season as well. And I'm kind of really excited to see what happens in the next few rounds.
Yeah, me too. There's so much to unpack there, isn't there? Like
So
the finances side of things, it's very interesting because obviously Zach's gone, and now Luke, who is also Williams Academy, has taken his seat. And it's so tough because I'm such a huge fan of both, as I've mentioned multiple times, even just in this episode. I'm a Donington girl, and I watched both of them grow up racing at Donington. I watched them go through F4, like GB3, British F3. I can't remember. I think it had changed to GB3 by the time Zach did it. So yeah, GB3, like the whole way through to get up to F3, since they started in single seaters, even like I saw Luke in like Janetta Juniors and stuff. And it's just so tough that like seeing one get pushed out for the other. It's tough because I'm so happy for Luke to get the opportunity, but it's such a shame to see Zach lose that. And in reality, that could have been any driver on the F2 grid. It really could have been like any driver could have been in Zach's position. And it's so tough to like, I don't know, F2. I feel like I have a lot of thoughts on F2 that would be deemed controversial, but I think you've touched on them. So now I'm like, well, I can dive right in. It's clearly no one views F2 as representative anymore. No one within F1. The team, like Toto Wolff, is not looking at the F2 results thinking I'm going to sign Kimi Antonelli. He's looking at that overtake at Spa, that win at Silverstone. For me, a moment that I cannot stop mentioning, when he won the motorsport games with a broken wrist. Like all of these moments that Kimi has, that might not be. I mean, Silverstone obviously was a race win, and motorsport games was a race win. They're probably not the best examples to illustrate the point I'm about to make, but I feel like he has so many moments that don't really show in the championship. Same with Ollie. Baku with the broken steering wheel, still, I just can't compute. But I feel like it shows that the F2 standings just aren't representative anymore. And I think everyone knows that certain drivers are getting mega chromed with their engines. Certain drivers aren't able to show their full potential. Other drivers are just getting mega engines and just completely, no disrespect to them, but outperforming what it relatively should be compared to the others. It's so difficult. I just don't know if F2 is. I love F2 and I'll always, big it up, talk about the drivers, but it's become very apparent this year, I think, that the team bosses and the important people in F1 aren't looking at that championship table. They're looking beyond that. And they know a good driver when they see one. And a good driver doesn't always equal top of the F2 standings, even though I still think Gabriel Bortoleto is a really good driver. So no, I'm not trying to shade him.
No, I think the difference with, I'd say, Gabriel Bortoleto is because he's done the back-to-back. I think that is something that no matter what machinery you're getting into is so difficult to do. So I think I saw like an article or a post about this where someone was like, no matter who wins the championship, it has been like almost universal that if you win it back to back, you are going to do well in F1. Like there isn't a driver who's done it back to back that hasn't then gone into F1 and done well. Whereas you have a lot of F2 champions who've gone into F1 and not done as well. And also the way you win it is so important because it's why drivers like Théo Pourchaire aren't rated as highly as someone like Gabriel Bortoleto, who hasn't even won F2 yet. It's why they're not considered in the same light, or why an Ollie Behrman, who came 6th last year, I think, isn't considered in the same light as Théo Pourchaire, who won the championship, and why a lot of people, me included, would say that Fred Vesti last season had a better season than Théo Pourchaire, had a more impressive season, but Theo's consistency allowed him to win the championship, and Fred had some really shit luck sometimes. So I think it's all about how long you've been in F2 when you win it, the way you win it. Well, did you win by 100 points or did you win on the last round? And then your performance throughout the season. Were there other drivers who had these incredible performances but just had bad luck? It's a really difficult series, and I don't think it's one of those series that you can just look at the standings and get the full picture at all.
Definitely not. But then I think, as if you're a new fan getting into F2, it's very much marketed, and I think this is my issue with it. Like, I don't think the F1 like the people who are making decisions within the teams in F1 should just be looking at one grid of 1 year and going, that's who we want. I think it's a really good thing that they look beyond that. They clearly have more data than we do, and they look beyond that. They look at like different factors. But I think F2 is very much marketed as all the cars are equal. This is like, everyone's on a level playing field. Everything is the same. And it's all down to the driver's talent. So then as a new fan getting into it, you see a driver get to, win the championship. And you automatically, it's kind of marketed as, well, they're the best one. But obviously that's not reality. And it's such a difficult thing, because obviously the best driver doesn't always win the championship in any series. Like across the board, it's not always, as you said, it's not always the driver who's like, it's the driver who's got the most points, but it's not always the driver who's had the best season. Because I completely agree. Fred Vesky was my standout driver last year. I like the amount of wins he had,
Insane. Actually
insane.
unhinged how dominant that man was for the majority of that season.
But then you look at F3 this year, Leonardo Fornaroli won the championship in F3 with no wins.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think that's like one of the biggest issues with F2 is definitely how it's marketed. And I found this season, especially because I'm a very big Ollie Behrman fan. Most people are aware of this because I was very excited when he got the Ferrari drive and then when he got announced to be the Haas driver for next year. I'm a very big Ollie Behrman fan, and defending Ollie Behrman because of his place in the F2 standings this year when he got that F1 seat was my full-time job for about a few
Yeah.
weeks. Because people who haven't watched F2 or have only like sat down and watched a few races and don't really understand the complexities behind actually, even though they're being marketed as equal, it's not.
Yeah.
They obviously look at the standings and they go, why are two drivers who are like literally below the top five getting F1 seats when the likes of Isaac Hadjar, Gabriel Bortoleto, Zane Maloney, like stuff like that, they're not getting F1 seats? And that's also a question that is so often asked in the F2 press conferences. Every single F2 press conference, when a driver has been announced, they're like, how do you feel about a driver below you getting a seat before you? And it's like, that's not how this series works, though. Even if on paper it does, that is not how this series works. And it frustrates me to no end.
Yeah, me too. So we spoke about Ollie Behrman getting the F1 seat, which I assume was on, if you made your dream grid before it was announced, I assume that was on your dream grid. And then
Of
we've
course.
got Kimi Antonelli's been announced. Liam Lawson's just been announced the day that we're recording this. Who else have we got?
Jack
Is there
Doohan.
any? Is that everyone?
Jack Doohan for Alpine.
Oh my god, I forgot about doing.
Can't
Sorry, it's
believe you
because I was
forgot about
going
Jack
through
Doohan. That's
the F2 grid this year, and I was like,
no.
Dylan. So we've got Dylan. Okay, there we go. So we've got four. Apart from those four, okay, so those four are locked in. We'll take them because they're rookies. You've already done your like dream grid, so I won't ask you to just like repeat it. But out of the current F2 grid, if you could pick one other rookie to be joining the F1 grid full time next year, and what seat you'd want to put them in, who would it be?
Oh, that's so difficult.
It can.
I
We'll include Franco Colapinto as well because
Yes,
he's
yeah. I would literally build an F1 team for Franco Colapinto
yeah.
at this point. Like I will literally that's what I'm gonna be doing in my free time actually, building him an F1 team.
Need some
No,
funding? I'll put some money into it. Let's make it happen.
exactly. I'm telling you, we could in 10 minutes I could fundraise enough money for Franco Colapinto because I made one video about
Infrastructure.
Franco Colapinto and the Argentinian fans came a running. I had people commenting on that video being like, I don't understand a word you're saying, but we love you because you love Franco. And I was like, I love you guys. But anyway, I'll get back to the main point. I don't know. I like there are two drivers. No, there are three drivers actually that I would
Are
want
there
to put.
20?
There are actually 20 drivers that I would like to put in seats. No, some of them I don't think about, can't lie. Some of the F2 drivers I do forget exist sometimes. But there are three main drivers I'd like to put in a seat. Paul Aaron, because my God, does that man deserve it? I feel so bad for him. And also like this season has been properly his like redemption arc of like Mercedes dropped me, see what I can do. And I think as well when you look with him in comparison to like Amory Cordial, his teammate, he's definitely outperformed the machinery he has, I'd argue. I feel like he's done pretty well. And you know what? Like, I just think he deserves it, and I want him in a seat. I would put him. Which seat would I put him in, though? That's the question.
Mm.
I don't know. Honestly, put him in a Red Bull. Let's see what happens.
I
Why
feel like
not?
that makes sense because obviously Mercedes dropped him from their academy. Red Bull can snap him up.
And then I think Max and Paul, two drivers that Toto almost got but didn't. You know, that would be
Photo
really fun for me.
rejection.
Just
circle.
imagine the edits on TikTok after that. Like imagine the sad Toto edits. And then obviously like Gabriel Bortoleto, just because I think he's insane and he deserves it, but I'd put him in the Audi seat where he's being rumored to be an option. And then finally, but just because I love him and I'm completely and utterly biased, Pepe Marti. I like him a lot. I think he's really funny. He's really lovely, and I think he deserves better than this F2 season has treated him. So I really want him to get a seat in F1, basically. That's
Yeah,
where I'm at with that.
I
That's
think
my
that's
bias.
so fair. I honestly, I've not really thought about this until I asked you this question. So now I'm having to like look through the like the F2 entries this year because I want to say someone different than you to that's why I'm not just saying the same things. Zane Maloney is obviously Formula E. That's an interesting one I wanted to mention
See,
as
that's why
well.
I kind of just didn't think about him because he's off to
Yeah,
Formula E
no, so
anyway.
fair. Because I feel like in my head, he's always been going to Formula E. This Sauber Academy thing,
I
I
like I actually think this is. I actually have something to say about this because first of all, I think he has been going to Formula E for a while because he's been what like a test driver for 2 seasons for Formula E for Andretti, and he's always said like in interviews that if an F1 seat wasn't available, IndyCar and Formula E would be the first places he looked. So for me, this makes a lot of sense for him. But the Sauber Academy, why even have it? I'm so sorry, why even have it? And I know part of the reason that they're not using it is because Audi are coming in, and obviously, like the Audi management have come in, even if Audi won't be Audi for like what till 2026. So they're obviously like, we're not going to use Sauber's driver academy, but they signed Zayn this year. He's not, it's
they
not like
just took the bag.
he's not like it's not like he's been in this like academy for years and years and now that the management's changed he's not being considered. That academy, like he joined this year. He went, I'll take the sponsorship money, I'll do a season in F2, thanks babes, and honestly respect him for that. But can they just disband the academy at this point because they're clearly not having any intention of using it,
No, you
and
can't
it
have
annoys me.
you can't have Taylor Porcher do 3 seasons of F2. Bear in mind, they fully funded. This is what I've heard. They fully funded his third F2 season
So
so that he could win it, and then they still haven't signed him. So it's like, why have you done that? Why have you funded this?
they didn't even have him test drive this season in the FP sessions. They
Nothing.
drug over Robert Schwartzman and had him test drive on Teo Porcher's birthday instead of having Teo Porcher do it.
I think Schwarzman's going
Literally
to
what?
IndyCar. This is the segue into the final
Oh my
thing we
God.
were going to talk about. IndyCar, because you've got into IndyCar lately. Firstly, my point is I think Prema have signed Eilert for IndyCar. I think they're going to sign Schwartzman in their second seat. I could be wrong, but that's what I think. But IndyCar, anyway, generally that links us so nicely. You got into IndyCar this year. It's your first like experience watching pretty much a full season of it. What are your thoughts?
Oh my God, I love it so much. Yeah, so I got into it like the back end of last year. I think I watched like 3 or 4 races last season, if even that. And I did get into it because of Marcus Armstrong and Screaming Meals. Love you guys. Screaming Meals, shout out. But I like got into it because Marcus was over there and Callum Ilott was there. Big up Callum Ilott. He went to my primary school. So he did a talk at my primary school and he was the first ever driver that I ever like kept tabs on because I think he was in like F3 or F4 at the time when I was like in like the last year of my like primary school. And every now and then I'd Google his name to see how he was doing. So that was my first ever motorsport interaction. But yeah,
That was
so I've
before
been
you were even. That was before you were
that
even
was
an
before
F1
I
fan.
even cared about cars driving around in funky shapes. So that's my like invisible string moment if I ever meet Callum Ilott.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I basically this was my first full season watching it. And I mean, like watching it, like my God, I'm gonna wake up at like obscene hours to sit down and watch this and hope Marcus Armstrong wins every single weekend without fail. Because pure
Bold.
delusion gets us through it. And then I like obviously fell in love with like all of the other IndyCar drivers. I think where I differ in my opinions of F1 or even F2 to IndyCar, there is only like 2 drivers in IndyCar that I do not love with my whole heart. Like all of them I love so much. I like actually just they're just so funny. I think it's because of like the lack of PR training and walls built around that you have in F1. And again, it's often the reason I say I like F2 more than F1. It's like this more raw version of the drivers that you see. Like, I think it was Will Power's tweets leading up to the IndyCar final, inviting Alex Palou to come eat fish with him
It
and
was
saying,
McLaughlin. It was Scott McLaughlin, I
oh,
think, the
yes,
ones
there we
I
go.
saw. He was
Yeah, I
like,
think
yeah, he was like, come have sushi with me.
yeah, and like come ride on my motorcycle, let's go skydiving, things like that. Like just insane. Yeah, it was Scotty Mac because Power was
Yeah.
still in the contention. I just love it. Like the fact that they have a hate cauldron. Like IndyCar is actually just hilarious. I unfortunately missed the 500 because I was obviously at the Monaco Grand Prix. And I got home from the Monaco Grand Prix and was like, let me put it on. And it was delayed. And I was like, I need to sleep because I'm emotionally exhausted from all the sobbing I've done in the last like few hours. But I'm determined to watch it next year. I really want to go next year, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I'm actually determined to go to an IndyCar race next year. So IndyCar teams, if you want to invite me to a race, I'll gladly go. Preferably Chip Ganassi. Hi guys, love you. Um, please invite me. I also love Nolan Siegel so much. He has been like my surprise of this year because I was so upset when Teo Porcher and Callum Ilott and David Malukas all got changed around, especially David Malukas because I've also come to love him this season. And then they put Nolan Siegel in, and I was like, I'm not gonna like this child. And then I saw like 2 interviews with him, and I was like, oh my God, I literally love him so much. And now he's one of my faves. So maybe I shouldn't make quick judgments.
I
But yeah,
love
I love
that.
IndyCar. I recommend it to everyone nowadays because it's so fun and it's hilarious and it's unhinged.
Well, let's end the episode on manifestation that you'll end up at an IndyCar race next year. If Chip can actually see this, hi, how you doing? Chuck me an invite while you're at it.
Yeah.
Fleur, do you want to plug your socials and everything again so Chip Ganassi
Yes.
can find you?
Yeah, Chip Ganassi, if you guys are watching, Screaming Meals, if you're watching, Ferrari, I know you're an avid viewer of my content if you're watching. Checkered Flag with Fleur on every single platform. I go on a podcast called Chaos in the Paddock, and I write for Formula Nerds. So those are all the places you can find me.
In the description as well. Thank you for
Yes,
coming on the podcast. It's been great having
no
you.
problem. Love to be here.
A long time coming.
A long time coming.